Lula 2.0 is something that many people are trying to figure out. Exactly what kind of leader would he be?
Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva emerged as the winner of the just concluded elections in Brazil. Even though massive protests erupted in the country from pro-Bolsonaro supporters, Lula is set to take office once again after more than a decade since his second term ended. What is in store for Lula and his administration when he takes over the top job in Brazil? Lula was the president of Brazil from 2003 to 2011. His administration was regarded as the best moment in Brazil's history. It saw a commodity boom, an oil discovery that took over 20 million Brazilians out of poverty. Now Mr. Lula is back and set to take the country out of its current economic setback. But the excitement for Mr. Lula's return might be short-lived, as the current situation in Brazil is not what he faced the first time he entered office. Mr. Lula inherits a struggling economy, a weaker executive branch, and a divided, internet-obsessed nation where a sizable portion of the populace believes he committed electoral fraud. Even though he has more experience and is returning to the position, many of the challenges he will confront are unfamiliar to him. China was a significant buyer of Brazil's soybeans, iron ore, oil, and meat during his first term in office, which fueled the country's quick expansion and helped it become the sixth largest economy in the world by 2012. However, the global economy is now weaker. China has slowed down, and Brazil has been bogged in years of sputtering growth. Getting Brazilians 3 square meals was a major theme of Lula's campaign, and he has made it plain that his new administration's first priority would be increasing help to the underprivileged. Yet how he will navigate the country's finances will be one of his biggest tests. In order to pay for an increase in the minimum wage and an expansion of Brazil's social safety program, Mr. Lula wants to remove the expenditure cap. According to Daniel Curry, an economist who oversees the budget monitor for the Senate, Lula wants to add an extra $30 per month for each kid in such families to the roughly 115 monthly payments Bolsonaro started making to low-income families before the election. In 2023, that would cost more than $13 billion, but there is no more funding available in Brazil's budget. This is partially due to Bolsonaro's election-related economic stimulus, spending up to $30 billion, which included gasoline subsidies and giveaways to the needy in a bid to gain support. With far more political baggage entering power, Lula's plan might be derailed. With an approval rating of more than 80%, he was arguably the most well-liked person in the nation when he departed office at the end of 2010. He entered what was seen as retirement, but he soon found himself at the center of an extensive corruption probe that exposed a huge payoff scheme involving both his party and the Brazilian government. Lula was sentenced to 22 years in prison, but was released 17 months later after the Supreme Court ruled in his favor last year. Although the verdict did not establish this innocence, it did open the door for him to seek for office once more. However, the scandal largely destroyed popular confidence in Lula and his Workers' Party. Mr. Bolsonaro highlighted Mr. Lula's convictions while campaigning, and now that he has lost, Bolsonaro supporters are using them as proof that he cheated to win, putting Lula in a worse situation than she was in 2003. What will be Lula's biggest governing challenges? Brazil is facing some significant challenges, including slow economic growth, rising poverty, high crime rates, and an education crisis. After winning the election with less than 2 percentage points, which amounts to about 2 million votes, Lula and his party, the left-wing Workers' Party, will be governing a deeply polarized country. Analysts claim that several of his decisions so far have been made in an effort to find a compromise, such as choosing the former governor of Sao Paulo and center-right politician Geraldo Alckmin as his running partner. The path ahead is still incredibly difficult. Making progress in an immensely strong Congress after Bolsonaro's conservative Liberal Party acquired dozens of members in the general elections will be the first test for Lula's administration. The Liberal Party and its allies now hold a majority. that means that Lula will probably need to strike deals with exactly the same political leaders who have been allied with Bolsonaro over the past 2.5 years, writes Chatham House's Richard Lapper. Still, the situation in Brazil might not be as bad as it looks. By many measurements, the country's economy is in far better shape than it was in 2003. Trade and gross domestic product are much higher, and inflation and unemployment are lower. However, Brazil's government has taken an enormous debt in recent years, and it now exceeds 77% of the country's GDP. A major reason, according to economists, that is causing the slow economic growth in the country. That leaves Lula with little financial flexibility to stimulate the economy without causing a new public debt crisis. What is Lula's plan for the economy? Lula was one of the most well-liked presidents in Brazilian history during his previous term because of the strong economic success he oversaw. Foreign investment grew, social expenditure soared, and the rates of hunger and poverty all dramatically decreased. With his new administration, Lula has vowed to adhere to the same pattern. His election platform included pledges to raise the minimum wage, tax the wealthiest more heavily, implement a program for debt forgiveness, and increase the amount of state-funded social housing. Additionally, Lula has long made protecting Brazil's Amazon rainforest a top concern. The pace of forest destruction decreased by more than 70% over his first 2 mandates. His government campaigned for the funding of climate mitigation initiatives from wealthier nations. Environmentalists are expecting that Lula's return to office would reverse the trend of deforestation, which hit a 15-year high under Bolsonaro. The country's environmental budget would increase by approximately 200 million in 2019, according to Lula's new administration. And on Wednesday, Lula is scheduled to speak at the COP27 United Nations Climate Change Forum. By 2030, Lula wants to achieve net zero deforestation and establish a new ministry to advance the rights of the indigenous people of Brazil. Lula is also committed to eradicating illicit gold mining, recovering Brazil's leadership position in the global battle against climate change, ecosystems that are essential to preventing climate change during the most recent UN climate negotiations. Germany and Norway have pledged to continue contributing to the Amazon Fund, which was established in 2008 to encourage the sustainable use of the rainforest, in support of his efforts. Before Bolsonaro suspended it in 2019, both nations had contributed more than $1.2 billion to the fund. Previous Brazilian administrations have historically provided financial incentives to clear land for mining and infrastructural projects. Some decision-makers argue that limiting development in the Amazon might stymie the nation's economic expansion. The likelihood of Lula's environmental measures passing without the support of Congress, according to analysts, is quite low, particularly in light of the fact that Bolsonaro receives a sizable portion of his political support from states in the Amazon like Mato Grosso and Rondônia. Despite experts claiming that Lula has the authority to change environmental policies on his own, there will be little investment. The outcome of the entire scenario is still uncertain, since loggers, miners, and ranchers in rural sections of the nation are reluctant to give up their primary source of income so quickly. How is Lula expected to work with other world leaders? In addition, Lula has vowed to reinstate Brazil's status as a world leader, claiming that Bolsonaro's antagonism to multilateral institutions and growing exclusion have diminished the nation's power. He intends to rejoin regional organizations like the Union of South American Nations and the Community of Latin American and Caribbean States. Additionally, his government may restart trade negotiations that have been stalled for years due to Brazil's subpar environmental record between the European Union and Mercosur, a South American trading group. Despite the fact that Lula has openly denounced Russian President Vladimir Putin's decision to attack Ukraine, he holds Western officials, especially US President Joe Biden, responsible for not doing enough to stop the violence. Analysts predict that this might be a source of continued friction. Lula is also said to reject Western sanctions against Russia, because he feels that they increase a possibility of an escalation.